everyone. Welcome to tonight's Sourcebooks BookLight event. My name is Mary Weber O'Malley, and I'm honored to be your host for this evening. I am a virtual bookseller for Skylark Bookshop and scheduling producer and co-host of Blaze Boudoir on A Mighty Blaze. And you can find me talking books all the time on Instagram and Facebook at Blurb Your Enthusiasm. Tonight we have a couple of my favorite thriller authors, Carter Wilson and Julie Clark. Before we get started this evening, I want to remind you that if you order either of their books from any of the independent bookstores that are listed on Eventbrite, you will get signed book plates as well as some wonderful author swag, including, I believe, the bonus chapter from Julie's last book, The Last Flight. So very exciting stuff there. A reminder that this Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day. So you know what? You can support your favorite indie bookstore and do something great for yourself at the same time when you order either of the author's books from there. We hope you'll support our indie bookstores. As we move through our program tonight, please make sure you put any of your questions into the chat. We will get to those after the author conversation. So anything you'd like to add, please put there. So tonight we have Carter Wilson, who is the USA Today best-selling author of 8 critically acclaimed standalone psychological thrillers, as well as numerous short stories. He is an ITW Thriller Award finalist, a 4-time winner of the Colorado Book Award, and his works have been optioned for television and film. Carter lives in Erie, Colorado, in a Victorian house that is spooky, but is not haunted yet. Carter's writing career began on a spring day in 2003, when an exercise to ward off boredom during a continuing education class evolved into a 400-page manuscript. Since that day, Carter has been constantly writing. In addition to his published novels, Carter has also contributed short fiction to various publications and most notably was featured in the R.L. Stine young adult anthology, Scream and Scream Again. Julie Clark is the New York Times bestselling author of The Last Flight. It has earned starred reviews from Kirkus, Publisher Weekly, and Library Journal, and the New York Times called it thoroughly absorbing. It has been named an Indie Next Pick, a Library Reads Pick, and Best Book of 2020 by Apple Books. Her debut, The Ones We Choose, was published in 2018 and has been optioned for television by Lionsgate. She lives in Los Angeles with her 2 sons and a golden doodle with poor impulse control. So welcome, Julie and Carter. Now we have the fun part. We are going to start with Carter interviewing Julie, and then the tables will turn and Julie will interview Carter. As you listen along, please remember to put any questions you have into the chat, and after the conversation, we will ask the authors your questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to Carter and Julie. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Julie, hi.
Hi.
So I know you only a little bit, right? So you were actually one of my first guests on my podcast. So it was great to get to know you a little bit more. And apparently I have like 10 to 15 minutes now to talk to you. So I don't know if that's enough time for a thorough psychoanalysis session, but I want to try to get there a little bit. I just read The Lies I Tell. It's fantastic. And I don't read a lot of thrillers because I always get jealous. I'm like, why didn't I think of this? But I love The Lies I Tell. So I'm super excited to talk to you about it. But then as I read it, I realized we both kind of tend to write about people escaping their own lives, whether it's through creating false identities or just running. What's that all about? That's my question to you. Where does that come from? What are you hiding?
Yeah. Well, first, The Lies I Tell is the story of Meg Williams, a con artist who's traveled the country under assumed names and basically exploiting people's weaknesses in order to steal from them. And she's refined her craft over the course of 10 years because she's got one con that she's planning to pull, her last con. And what she doesn't know is that someone is on her tail, and it's a woman who wants her own revenge on Meg. So, I guess Meg wants to, Meg isn't really trying to disappear. She's just trying to recreate whatever reality she needs to create in order to achieve the goal that she has. So, she'll see somebody vulnerable. She'll see somebody who, and she targets mostly corrupt men who are taking advantage of women. She's not going to con just anybody. She's very thoughtful and very mindful of who she chooses to con. She has reasons behind it. And with every con, she learns something. Every con, she grows a little bit in her craft. And she really does think of it as a craft. She keeps meticulous notes on what works, what doesn't work, how to get into places. She uses social media heavily. But I would say she's not trying to escape or disappear. What she's trying to do is become somebody else for a period of time because it serves her purpose.
And you kind of hit upon it that her cons are kind of have multiple purposes to them. She's not just out there looking for money. She's not this villain. And likewise, the protagonist Kat, who you root for, also has some very gray areas about her. How do you, when you're sitting down to write and you're thinking about character development, how are you balancing that, making sure that, everyone's a little dubious, but they're still, hopefully appealing, whether they're good or bad, they're appealing to the reader?
I think that's the work that has to happen with any book, not just a book about a con artist or, Eva in The Last Flight, who's a drug dealer. You have to remember that there really is no such thing as a villain, right? There's no such thing as like a bad guy, because even people who are breaking the law, doing bad things, conning people, selling drugs, they're doing it for a specific reason. They're doing it for a personal reason. They think that they're doing something that they either need to do, maybe it's something they want to do, but they're sort of the hero of their own story. And you have to approach every single character you write with that lens, right? You can't just write somebody truly bad. Although I will say that in The Lies I Tell, there is one character who's just really bad.
But that's fun too, right? So the character that was really bad, you might not even explain it in the book, but is it important to you that that person has a purpose, that there's a meaning behind what they do?
Yes.
And do you sometimes keep that back from the pages just to kind of have, maybe a different character show up, but that's important to you to have behind the scenes?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that you have to have, all characters have to have forward momentum. They all have to have motivation. And I personally feel really strongly that twists that happen in books need to be character driven and not plot driven. When they're plot driven, they don't always ring true because it's something that, you have happen and then your characters all react to it, and that's fine and that's all good. But the real shocking twists are the ones, I think, the ones that really land the hardest are the ones that are character driven, that have been developed through character development, so that when it happens, when they make that decision, when they do whatever it is that they're about to do or say or be, the reader is like, yeah, I can see how that could happen. It still may be a surprise, but they're not going to go back and be like, wait a minute, where did that come from?
Right. Well, that's an age-old argument, right? What's more important, plot or character development? I contend that it's emotion. That's the most important thing.
Yep.
Because if you don't have that emotion, nobody's connecting to you.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Wow.
So knowing that you kind of lean towards character development, are you outlining your books, or are you a pantser? What's your style?
I know the general beats of the story, the major turning points. So I know sort of how a thriller is supposed to work at this point. And I wouldn't categorize The Lies I Tell as a thriller. I would categorize it more as like a literary suspense, right? It's a suspenseful story. It's very character driven. There are a lot of exciting moments in it, but it's It's not like a heart pounding thriller that's high octane that, so let's all keep our hats on here. But I think what was the question? Now I got off track.
Well, that's okay, because I was going to go into that.
Okay.
Also, not knowing exactly maybe every page what's going to happen.
Oh, you were asking about the outline. Now I remember.
Yeah, is it important to you that like twists and things like that they just kind of come about organically? That maybe they're in your subconscious somewhere while you're writing, and then 200 pages later, they all of a sudden they bubble
I know
to
the big
surface.
ones. I know the big one that has to happen in the middle of the book. I know the big one that has to happen at the end of the book. I have to know how the book is going to end. I generally know what the launching off point is. I try really hard to make sure that that's the right place to start the book. And then everything else that happens in between, I don't really know until I write it. But for me, a first draft is maybe 60,000 words. It's not a lot. I mean, a finished book is anywhere from 85 to 95, 100,000 words, depending on the genre. And so my first drafts are generally pretty short, because what I don't want to do is waste a lot of time chasing a bunch of stuff that I'm just going to end up cutting,
Right. Yeah. And genres are so watery, right? Like, but that's such a hard balance, because you have readers that, might expect one thing because it's Julie Clark. It's got to be a thriller. It's got to be heart pounding.
Right.
How do you balance that?
I mean, I can't worry about that in the same way that I worry about character development, because what it comes down to is really the marketing and sales departments decide what it is.
Right.
I don't get to decide. But I think my editor works really hard too, to make sure that, I had been working on a book for a year before I even thought about The Lies I Tell. And I sent her 50 pages and she's like, it doesn't really feel like a thriller. And I was like, what? And so then I had to scramble around and come up with a different idea, and came up with a book proposal for The Lies I Tell and sent it off. And she's like, that's what I'm looking for. And so that's what I ended up writing. But it's fuzzy math for me. I don't really know.
Right.
I just write the book that I want to write, and hopefully someone will buy it.
That's exactly my answer. That's where the joy in writing comes from. It's not following a formula.
No.
And that's not to say that that's wrong, but you have to have joy as an author, and it sounds like that's the way that you find it.
Definitely.
For The Lies That I Tell, what was the hardest part about writing this book?
Probably the speed at which I had to write it, because remember, I had wasted a whole year writing another book. And
not a waste.
Shayna, I know, not really wasted. Shayna, my editor, we had talked they bought it in October of 2020. And she had said, so it was the middle of the pandemic, right? Like we had nobody had been vaccinated yet. Everything's all closed. Everything's shut down. Things are getting from bad to worse, and so time really felt funny to me at that time. Like I couldn't really measure the passing of time. So my month counting was not so solid. And so she said, do you think you could have a draft to me by June of 2021? And I'm like, 2021? Of course, ages from now, that's like 2 years from now. Right. And so that it wasn't until I had, said, yeah, sure. No problem. And that a friend of mine said, you do realize that's in 9 months. And I was like, what? So that I think was mostly the challenge, but luckily for some reason, this book really was structured. I knew exactly how I wanted it to be structured. I knew exactly how I wanted it to go. And so it was just really sitting down and executing it was, it wasn't as hard. It took me a lot longer to write The Last Flight than it took me to write this one. So I think it was just a fluke, because the book I'm working on right now it's hard. It's always hard.
Writing is hard. It is really hard.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. You say you had the full structure kind of in your, I know how, you may not all the plot points, but I know the structure. Mm-hmm. So, and there's always that vulnerable part where a deadline comes, you turn it in. I don't know how many people have seen the book at this point. Probably not very many.
Not very many.
And you're sitting there for a week saying, what is my editor going to say? And because you don't know. And so what was that? But you have this idea of the structure. Does your editor come back and do you feel like supported in that? Or was it like, oh my God, I got to do all the work?
She knew what the structure was. So basically the book starts out in the present where, they're both back in Los Angeles. Kat sees Kat knows that Meg is back and she's ready for her. And Meg is back and ready for her final con. And then we sort of see the two of them come together, but not come together. And then we go back and kind of learn more about Meg and how she came to become a con artist and her backstory and her first con that she ever pulled. Then we're back in the present time with Kat and Meg, and Kat's trying to infiltrate Meg's life in a way where Meg doesn't know who she is. And it's sort of a cat and mouse where you don't really know who's the cat and who's the mouse. You know, Kat's lying about her name and who she is and what she wants, and Meg doesn't seem to have any idea about that. And it's just kind of turned the tables a little bit. And then we go back in time again for the con that led to Meg coming back to Los Angeles, sort of the reason why she's back, her realization of like this, it's time. I've learned what I needed to learn, and now it's time to come back and pull the con. So it goes back and forth in time, but I had outlined that for her, for my editor at the very beginning of the process. So that structure wasn't a surprise to her. There were places where she was like, this is a little long, but you know,
right.
Other than that, you know, she was good.
Right. But yeah, and that's what they're there for, right? They are there to make the book better. And you'd lose all that perspective when you're writing. You're done with the book. You're like, I have zero idea if this is a good book or not. And are you, as you're writing, are you ever thinking about that next book, or are you just so tunnel visioned into what you're doing now?
I usually get my idea for my next book about halfway through working on whatever book I'm working on. And it just usually pops up as a little kind of like idea, a little seed. And I just kind of think like, that's interesting. And then I just keep working on my book, and it just keeps popping up and keeps popping up. And I just start kind of thinking about it. So I spend a lot of time thinking about it before I actually ever sit down to write it.
Wow, we're very similar, right? Because if that seed, if it's a good idea, it's not going to leave your head. You know, you can come back 6 months and like, I knew I was thinking about something. I didn't write it down. Oh, right, it was that. That's exciting. So, and then, you know, we're also similar in terms of we've got very full lives. What are your non-negotiables with your work-life balance with writing, with anything else that you're doing with family? When it comes to writing, what are your non-negotiables?
I think my non-negotiables are what's literally in my life right now. I don't have a lot of extra room. So sleep, writing, my kids, my day job, my family, those are really my non-negotiables. Like I'm not gonna skimp on any of those places. And so sometimes socializing falls by the wayside. You know, I was at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books last weekend, and I was like, people, you know, it was like a lot of people. And COVID was great for me. I did not have a problem at all staying inside. It was fabulous. It was great. It's my happy place. I was not really going stir crazy. And so, you know, being around people again and seeing a lot of authors connecting. And I was like, I got to do more networking. Like that's something that I don't do a ton of. And I have to, you know, it's part of my job. So.
Well, it's hard, right? And would you describe yourself as an introvert?
Yeah. And so socializing takes a lot out of me. It takes a lot out of me. I mean, I could have gone back to the festival on Sunday and I was like, one day is enough, you know?
Well, that's hard. Like, you know, in my conversations with authors, I would say the preponderance of authors are self-described introverts. And so it gets really difficult when it gets to self-promotion and things like that.
I mean, I don't mind doing that. That's the thing. I'm an introvert that loses energy socializing, but I don't mind socializing. I like it. It doesn't charge my battery, right? Yeah. It drains my battery. I like doing it. But I have to be very mindful of my battery. And when I do too much socializing, then I need to like disappear for a while and recharge because it doesn't feel, and I guess there are people out there for whom the battery charges when they're out being social. I don't understand how that would work. I hear that they exist.
That's great. Well, so the last question I just want to ask about this bonus chapter, because I think that sounds awesome. So are we talking an alternative ending to the book, or is it?
So with the last flight, I got a lot of messages from readers about the ending. And why I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything. If you haven't read the book, I suggest go reading the book first. But I got a lot of messages. Why did you choose to end it that way? They wanted it to end a different way. And I felt for me, it was the truest ending for the book. And so I kind of talked around a lot with the sourcebook folks and we played around a little bit with me writing the alternate ending. So the opposite of what happens for the paperback release, like Sourcebooks was like, ooh, that sounds interesting. But at the time I couldn't swing it with copy edits for Lies I Tell and finishing that up and everything. I didn't have the mental space for it because, I prioritize sleep, family, kids, teaching. Yeah. So, and so when it came time to talk about like kind of promotional stuff, they came up with the idea of writing the alternate ending to be a pre-order campaign. So if you pre-order a copy of The Lies I Tell from a participating independent bookseller, and there are a lot of them, you can go to my Instagram and scroll down a little bit. I'll probably repost it again in a few days, but it's down there maybe a few weeks ago, a list of participating bookstores that are participating in the pre-order campaign. You will get a copy of the alternate ending for The Last Flight. Now, this is just The Last Flight, just the ending. And just really quick, I'm just gonna read you the first sentence and then it's gonna be off to you. And this starts 1 year after the crash. The locals call the stranger who lives in the tiny house at the top of the hill, La Fantasma, the ghost. And so that's where the story picks up again for people who are looking for a continuation of The Last Flight. You've got it.
I love that. That's fantastic. Well, great. Good interviewing you. I wish I had more time.
I know. It's your turn now. So I want to talk about The New Neighbor, which came out in April.
Yep. April 12th.
April. And so Carter has taken us back to the town of Barry, New Hampshire, to the Yates house again. That was featured in
The Dead Husband.
The Dead Husband. So tell us a little bit, why did you go back to Barry again? It's Barry or Bury?
However you want. I say Bury.
Okay.
So I write standalones and I'm always excited about a new place, new characters. It really gets me going. But man, I wrote The Dead Husband and I created the fictional town of Bury, New Hampshire, and I created this house and I finished that book and I'm like, I'm not done with this house. And so I kind of had an opening scene for The New Neighbor, because that's all I ever start with is an opening scene. And I don't know anything else about the book, but I'm like, I've got to put these people in that house. And I've got to make sure they're both totally standalone stories. But if you read both of them, more comes out of it. But I just wanted to keep exploring that space because the house really is its own character.
Yeah. I think that, I found myself, it's been a year since I read The Dead Husband, and I found myself remembering quite a bit. There were parts that I was like, oh my God, that part, I'm not going to do any spoilers or anything, but there's one part of the house where something really bad happened. And like the characters in The New Neighbor are like, I wonder what, there's like some remnants of it still. And they're like, I wonder what that's about. And it's like, I know. So I do recommend reading it, but you're right. You don't have to read it to get sort of the full effect. But your main character, Marlowe, he has just suffered a devastating loss of his wife, right? He's at the funeral, burying his beloved wife with his children there. And he gets a notification that he won the lottery, millions and millions of dollars. So my question is, what would you do if you won the lottery like Marlowe did?
It's funny. I've wanted to write about lottery winners for a long time, and I never quite knew how to do it.
Because they're kind of a creepy kind of sect of people, right? Like
totally. You read stories about lottery winners, and it quite often does not go well. It does not go well at all. And I just liked, and so again, I just had this opening idea for a scene. I didn't know who these people were or why they're doing what they're doing, but I'm like, what if you're torn, your heart is torn in half because you just lost the person you love, and you win the lottery on the same day. What I love more than anything is to throw things at my characters and be like, what are you going to do now? And so I decided, how are you emotionally going to handle this? And you have 2 7-year-old twins that you have to raise alone. And so that was exciting to me. But so I think if I if I were to win the lottery, I'd be very cagey about it. I don't like to say I would give it all away, but I would certainly
I wouldn't give it all away.
Let somebody else manage it because I wouldn't trust myself with it.
Yeah, definitely. Would you buy a big fancy house that had sight unseen like Marlowe does?
I would not, specifically because of that. And so I used to play the lottery every week because I got that from my dad, same numbers. And about 10 years ago, I'm like, this is such a waste of money. Are the numbers in the
book the ones that you and your dad played?
No, and fortunately, I don't remember the numbers. I tried to purge them from my head because I never wanted to go back and check to see if those numbers ever hit, because that would be so. That was another book idea. Is like, what if you went back 10 years later and found out you would have been a multimillionaire if you'd kept playing those numbers?
That's a good idea too.
I didn't go that route, but I would be very kind of cagey if I won the lottery.
Would you like, what if you were in the middle of a heartbreak though? Like what if you were in the middle of something really tragic happening? Would you still be cagey?
I think I would just be completely overwhelmed. And that's where kind of the emotion comes into the book. It's like, I think we all have ideas about what we would do in certain situations, but we can never quite account for how we would feel when it actually really, no joke, happens. And I try to get close to that in my books to say, God, how would I feel if I were doing this? So, as much as I want to say like, yeah, I think if I were desperate, I would use the money, it would be great. I think the emotions would be overwhelming, and I think it makes you unpredictable.
Well, I think that's why we write fiction, right? Is because a lot of these things, thankfully, won't ever happen to us. And so we really do, though, want to explore, because every single choice my characters make, every single decision they make, it's all about what would I do in that situation. Now, of course, read it. We don't know really what we would do, but I think authors get about as close as we possibly can to knowing, because we live so fully inside our character's mind.
Right.
I don't think that you can get any closer to knowing how you would react in a certain situation without actually having gone through it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So if you watch TV shows or read books as a fan, that's the visceral experience you want to have is like, I'm safe, but what if this happened to me? And I can explore that while being safe. When you're actually writing that content and creating that content, you do get a lot closer to it. And sometimes you get kind of sucked into it in a way that you can't even see until your editor says, okay, you're way too much in this dude's mind. We need to back out of this a little bit. And I will remember like, oh, I remember writing the scene. I was kind of in a weird space when I was writing it. And your advice is great, but that's what I needed at the time.
Yeah, well, that kind of leads me to my next question, because as this book progresses, Marlowe becomes more and more unreliable. So how did you navigate that downward spiral for him? Like both as the writer and as Marlowe, the development of Marlowe, the character?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's probably what the hardest part of writing the book was for me, was being inside Marlowe's head, very, very close, and not having confidence about what he perceived to be real or not. I'm very fascinated by memory. There's a thread of memory through all of my books. That's very important to me to write about, because I think the trappings of your own mind are scarier than anything else that could present itself to you. So I took Marlowe into a very dark place where he didn't quite know what was going on. And it's interesting bringing back the house into it all is I don't know how you do it, but I keep just kind of notes as I write, just on a scrap Word document that I just kind of jot down random things, with the more important notes kind of being towards the top of that page. And every now and then I'll go and look at it just to remind myself kind of things that I'd been thinking. And at the top of this scrap for this book was the sentence, keep in mind at all times, this is ultimately a haunted house story. And so I kind of kept coming back to that. I mean, this house has a malevolent past, and Marlowe's got a lot of stuff going on, but maybe there are other things that are influencing how he reacts, how he thinks, how he behaves. And so that was important to me, that there was that mood, that just kind of, and that heaviness that sat on him every minute that he spent in that house.
Well, and Marlowe's also Irish. And so, they have a long, history of being kind of dark and brooding and like
superstitious.
And Marlowe starts drinking heavily, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you bring in Marlowe's dad as well. I loved his dad, who just was like this Irish guy that was like, no nonsense, like, get it together, son, but what experts did you consult when you wrote this? I mean, do you have any connection with being Irish or Irish friends? Or, I mean, you
None.
really nailed the voice.
It's a curse, because what happens, so
Right.
going back to the idea that I have this opening scene, and that's all I know about the book. In this opening scene, I'm like, oh, he's Irish. And I don't know why I thought that.
I know why.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, what a
Just
pain.
is
Now I
what
got
it
to deal
is.
with that. So then you start going down that rabbit hole of research of like, somebody who's lived here 20 years, but lived this
Right.
first 20 years in Ireland. What do they talk like?
Right.
Versus the father who's coming straight from Dublin. So yeah, it's mostly internet research. I've got a couple Irish friends I can run a couple things by, but to me it was just a pain. I'm like, oh, why does he have to be Irish? This is now some more work, and I don't like research.
So much
but
work.
It just had to be.
Why can't he be a guy from Colorado?
Right.
Yeah.
But I never write what I know. That's important to me,
That's
because
interesting.
what's exciting to me is exploring and discovering. And so it's more work, but it's also like, oh, I never knew this kind of world existed.
But so is that why you invented the town?
It is. Yeah. I decided, like, I chose Manchester, New Hampshire for Mr. Tinder's Girl. And I didn't know anything about Manchester. I kind of randomly picked it. I flew out there and I spent a few days. So I really kind of fell in love with that whole area.
Right.
And I need to have a town that fits this bill, and I want it to be there. And that town didn't exist. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to make it up, and then I can world build. And that's really fun.
That sounds fun. I haven't done that. And I don't know that I don't know. I just think like world building. I always think about world building in the realm of fantasy, right? And it's like, oh, that's what they do, But I mean, it does sound like, I mean, you've done a great job. The town is vivid. It's, and the characters inhabit it very, very, authentically. This is a book about grief and how it carries forward in time. Can you talk about why you wanted to write about that, or what drew you to that theme to explore?
Yeah, that's a good question. And not to keep saying I don't know, but I truly think that more than plot and character development, the emotion has to ring out of the book, because that's how I read. When I read something, and if I don't, all the action in the world could be happening, and if I don't care about the emotion of the character, it's flavorless to me. So. And because I set up this opening scene, and I didn't decide that I just wanted to write about somebody who lost their spouse, it just kind of occurred to me. And so now I'm given this scenario, so that I say, well, what do I do with this? And of course you can't escape the grief that just is going to be the core of that if you've lost some. So you think about, the relationships in your lives, and you do have those thoughts, like, if I lost this person, I don't know how it would go on. I literally don't know how. Yeah. And so I took it from that perspective of like, you are just making your way minute by minute through the day. Yeah. How are you going to do it? And then things start happening. To me, books are all about kind of overcoming something, or hopefully, or maybe not, but there's always that challenge that it's like, are you going to get through this or not? And it was just important that I kind of explored that.
Yeah, well, you did it really well. I mean, it was sometimes, in some places it was hard to read, not hard to read, like not good, but hard to read, very well done, because the emotion just brings you, it just pulls at you, that his huge loss was just so monumental that, I mean, winning millions and millions of dollars really paled, right? Like you could feel that, like he just was like,
yeah. Well, that was important to me, is to, if you just wrote, then his wife died, that's meaningless. You have to show scenes where it's like, what does that do to you as you're sitting on the couch alone at night with the lights off and you're haunted? What does that feel like? And what does that look like? And you do kind of lose perspectives, because sometimes I'll write something that people are like, that's really dark. I'm like, oh, I didn't see that as dark.
It's a dark thing.
Yeah. So you like, I'm sure you experience, like, you lose perspective of what it is you're writing. You're just kind of writing.
Do you know how your books are going to end, or when you start writing, or do you find your way there as you write?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anything beyond that opening scene. That's literally all I know. So usually about 70-80% of the way in, I'll start to have an idea about an ending.
70-80%.
Yeah,
Wow,
it's all organic with me. So it does mean to me it all comes alive in the
How long
editing.
does it take you to write a book and get it to a place where you feel like, okay, I can show it to my editor now and they won't fire me?
If I'm really, because I only write an hour a day, that's typical, but I 7 days a week. So between getting the draft done, rewrites, getting feedback, and some more edits, probably 9 to 10 months if I'm applying myself. I know a lot of people write way faster than that. I can't do that because I've got priorities in my life, just like you. But it's the joy for me is the organic part of it, of just having that moment like, oh my God, this is what happens, and not knowing that. And then hopefully it's going to surprise the readers. But to me, I'm writing for myself initially, and then hoping that people like it. But that's where I get my joy.
I like that part too, where you just, you're struggling with something, you're not really seeing, it's not quite connecting. And then you just get it and you're like, that's it. Yeah. And that feeling is really, really good. But sometimes it takes a while to get there.
Totally. And all I'm doing when I'm writing is asking myself, what if? Like I'm writing a scene, like, what if she opened this and there's that in there? Like, what would that mean? And maybe you don't follow that path, or maybe you do, and maybe you follow it 5,000 words and they have to backtrack.
Yeah, I was going to say, so how do you keep yourself from kind of wandering off the path? I have
that's where my editor comes in.
Do that. Oh, okay.
Be like, oh, you kind of wandered a lot inside Marlowe's head here. There's a lot that I cut. But yeah, again, you really have to finish the draft. That's the hardest thing to do. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be anywhere close to perfect, but just finish it. Put it aside for a little bit and then go back with hopefully a fresh lens and see like, okay, yeah, this part drags, this part, I want to explore a little bit more. It really does. I'm all about kill your darlings. It really does come alive in the editing.
I have no problem with that.
Me neither.
So are you going to set any more books at the Yates House in Bury, New Hampshire, or is this the last one?
Never the last, so I don't know. I've got something that I just turned in that I've got a lot of work left to do on it. And then I've got an idea for something after that. And then I would kind of like to, because you read both these books that are set in Bury, and, the challenge of trying to make them both standalone means that if you only just read one of them, there's going to be some questions left unanswered. So I do like the idea of a third book that kind of just like, here's how all of this concludes.
Don't you think the house deserves some kind of closure, or at least a little bit of a healing ceremony you can sage at the end? That could be your last scene. I'm just making some suggestions.
Yeah, I would love to go back to Bury.
In with the bell and some sage and
a Ouija board.
Yeah, and a fresh coat of paint.
That's right. I would love to go, and that's what I love about the house is that it's not a traditional haunted house. It's a 1980s mansion that's kind of.
I know, tacky. And I was picturing I was like, oh, 1980s. Okay, so we've got gold metallic hand railings and Miami Vice pink walls, and
it's not that bad. It's still New Hampshire. Leroy Neiman prints on the wall.
Yeah. That's right. And that Crayola thing. Yeah.
Right. I love it.
All right. Well, that is, I think my 15 minutes are up.
Thank you for interviewing me. That was fun.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I did not know it was possible to go back in time and enjoy a book I've already read more. But after hearing you guys talk about the behind the scenes of each of your books, I found myself revisiting the books and getting a new level of enjoyment out of them. That was absolutely wonderful. And we have some great questions from some of our viewers. So we're going to start with a question from Donna. And this is for both of you. You both write characters who are not what they seem, and they have the ability to manipulate others. Do you find yourselves in your real lives taking people you meet at face value, or are you just initially skeptical of everyone?
You go first, Julie.
I'm skeptical of everyone, but I've always been okay. I had a very good college friend that had to send me a private message on Facebook because I wasn't accepting her friend request because I didn't really believe it was her, despite the fact that we had like 47 mutual friends. I was like, I was already friends with you. I don't think this is you. I think everybody's being suckered and I'm the only smart one. So I had to have like several references, people like saying, no, it's really her. You can go ahead and accept it. Before I actually did. I'm very skeptical of people. I don't trust anybody.
Wow. I don't distrust people. I'm fascinated by people. I think everyone's got a really interesting story. I think very few people reveal that, and fair enough. And I know there's a lot of insidious stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So nothing is more interesting to me than meeting somebody and immediately asking them personal questions.
True.
Because I want to dig into that.
True. But I mean, like, I'm talking about strangers. So like when I'm stopped at a red light, I'll look at the person next to me and I'm like, that person has a body in the trunk. $5 says they've got a body in the trunk. Look at them, and, my kids are like, Mom, but I do, I just, and I'll ask my 16-year-old, like, what do you think the person did that why'd they end up in the trunk?
Wow.
Yeah.
Now you're getting them into storytelling.
Oh yeah. No, we do. We absolutely, we play a lot.
Love it. Love it. So for both, though Carter says he never writes what he knows, Julie and Carter, do you ever find the seeds of your characters in the people you meet, or do you pull them out completely from your imagination?
There's a lot of stories about authors who are like, I was in a Starbucks and I was just watching this person and that person's a character. And that's not me at all. I pull it out of my imagination, but, and also I think about like TV shows that have really captivated me. I'm like, well, why did that work? Why was she interesting to me? Like, was it the writing? Was it how she looked? Was it how she was able to use her face? And so sometimes I'll think about that because I tend to write cinematically, but it's very rare that I base, any people I meet, into any of my novels.
Yeah, I don't really base it on people that I know because I don't think that I could write it in a way that it wouldn't be transparently clear who I was talking about to anybody that would know them. But I do get inspired by podcasts, TV shows. The idea that I got for Lies I Tell came when I was listening to a podcast about a con artist in Australia, and it was a male con artist, and he had, seduced a woman into, dating him and falling in love with him and getting her to invest her money with him and then her parents' money with him. And I remember thinking, like, I think a woman could do this better. I think this guy, he's transparent to me. But I think a woman would be a lot harder. A female con artist would be a lot harder to spot because we're inherently more trustworthy. Number one, like I always tell my kids, if when in doubt, when you're in danger, find the mom, right? Like women are not a threat, right? And the second thing is that we are always underestimated, right? We're always kind of patted on the head like, oh, that's a great idea. Let me revise it and pass it off as my own. So those two things I felt worked really well to write a female con artist because I think that people underestimate women a lot of the time.
That's very true in my experience as well. And it worked so well. This question is for Carter. You mentioned you don't read many psychological thrillers. What genres do you read, and are you inspired by them?
I mean, I mostly read nonfiction. I love, like, opposite of whatever I write, I love, like, stories about like corporate malfeasance. I find that fascinating. Or I love biographies because I love origin stories. But that being said, I'm not going to pass up any new Stephen King novel or several other books. And, I get books to blurb and things like that. But, you read thrillers and sometimes it is a little bit hard to, like, disassociate yourself as a writer from what you're reading. So, it's got to be, a book that's going to really resonate with me as a thriller to read it.
Very good. And Julie, the life of a con artist sounds like an adrenaline rush. Did you feel that way when you were writing the book? How about when you finished the manuscript before the edits? Was that an adrenaline rush for you?
I think for me drafting Meg, the con artist, it was really important that I get every piece of the con right. What I didn't want is anybody writing me on Instagram or via my author website saying like that would never happen, or that doesn't work like that, or, you know. And so I was so busy trying to nail down each of the cons that she pulled to make sure, like talking to real estate agents, talking to lawyers, talking to, you know, people who, you know, politicians, people who would know what would work and what wouldn't work. So I didn't feel the adrenaline that Meg feels because I was so it's a lot of work to be a con artist, my friends. It is not easy. It may be harder to be a con artist than to be an author, because you know, if I don't get it right, you know, my editor will catch it, my copy editors will catch it, my readers will catch it. But if Meg doesn't get it right, like, she's in jail, like her life is over. So, you know, it's really hard. The stakes are high. So I really had to make sure that I nailed that piece down, so I didn't have that adrenaline. And as far as turning the manuscript in, I don't know. I think you collapse in exhaustion when you turn in the manuscript. I mean, it is a hard push to meet that deadline. And it's really important to me to not push deadlines, because it messes up people on my publisher's end, and everybody has to move things around. And I don't like inconveniencing people. So like, I'll kill myself to hit a deadline. So really, when you hit send and you send it off to your editor, you're like, off to you, best of luck. Don't call me, I'll call you, right? I don't want to hear from you for a while. Yeah.
And by the way, Julie's next book is called, you know, I'll kill myself to make a deadline. So.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful title.
Yeah. It's a way. The source books will probably test market it first, but it's best potential.
Julie, another one for you. You mentioned that almost no character is completely bad. Do you think there's a line that defines when a character turns that corner and becomes bad? Do you believe everyone under the right circumstances has the ability to not just do a bad thing, but become a bad person?
I think that as an author, I can choose to write about the bad people who are in circumstances that explain their badness, if that makes sense, right? Like, I think there are bad people in the world who do really, truly awful, evil, bad things. I'm not writing about that. That's not I don't want to give them any page space. So what really fascinates me are the people who are human, who maybe are, you know, caught between a rock and a hard place, who are maybe having some, you know, problems in their life that I have to figure out and make up and build all that backstory and make sure that that rings true for the reader, so that when they make their bad choice, it makes sense, you know, and that the reader can be like, oh, don't do that. But at the same time, be like, yeah, they're going to do it. And I see why, but I wish they wouldn't. But if I didn't have them do those things, then the book would be over.
Yes, yes. And you both did such an incredible job making your characters completely relatable and being able to see what's coming and where they're going and just be like, no, 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 no. But at the same point, I could understand with each of them why things turned out the way they did and why they ventured off into one direction.
Yeah.
So the next question is for both of you, and it's about your book titles. Are your book titles the ones that were originally thought of, or did they change during the process?
They changed. Not all of them, but my last, I think 3 books with source books, they changed the title. And so I don't give it too much thought as I'm writing it. It's just kind of a working title, because I know that there's an art and science behind book covers, book titles, things like that. And that's not my expertise. So I leave it to those who know best. You know, they give us, they allow us input. But yeah, let the smarter people figure out what title resonates the best.
Yeah, same. With the last flight, well, we sold the last flight. They didn't change the title because my agent and I spent months and months and months and months and months trying to come up with a title for that book. We couldn't. I mean, and finally, right before we went on submission with it, we came up with the last flight, and that was the one that stuck. And Sourcebooks loved it, and everything was great. But with The Lies I Tell, I didn't even really have a name for it. I kind of jotted down a name for it, which they actually liked, but I didn't like. And so we backtracked and tried to find a better title for it. And this is what we came up with.
Should have been called Cat and Mouse.
I know, but that's a little kitschy.
I know. Yeah. It's a little precious.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I did. Why did I name her Cat with a K? That. I don't know. Yeah.
And of course, everybody would like to know what you are each working on now.
I'm so speaking of deadlines, I extended my deadline by 2 weeks and turned it in, and there's a lot of questions on the manuscript. So I'm going, and it kind of goes back to, I wrote something that maybe is not a traditional Carter Wilson thriller. And while I'm staying true to that, my editor had some phenomenal comments, and it's several months worth of work. So I'm in the throes of that.
I am not at liberty to say right now. It's very early. We haven't even sold it yet. So I'm taking my time. The last one I pushed through so fast and wrote it so fast, and that's not really how I like to work. And so I really want to take the time. I feel like books really have to marinate, for me at least. I need to figure out what the book is about. Somebody in the chat had asked, about theme. Do I know about the theme before when I start a book? And I really don't. And I really don't feel like I can even show or even talk about a book until I have an idea of what is this book really about? Carter's is about grief, and, The Lies I Tell is about, redemption and justice, and revenge a little bit. And so, until I can jot that out really quick, I can't say, but I'm having fun writing it.
Excellent.
No deadline.
And I know you both touched on your writing process a little bit, but somebody asked, with all the other things going on in your life, how do you focus on your writing and not let distractions get in your way? Do you have any recommendations for aspiring writers to help their concentration?
I write at the same time every day. And so my writing brain is sort of primed like my dog. When I wake up and I put on my tennis shoes, he knows what's happening, and so when I get up and I sit at my desk, my brain kind of knows what's happening. And so I generally carve out 2.5 hours or so a day to work on my writing. That's all I have before I have to get, I do it early in the morning. So then I need to get ready for work and get the kids up and do all the things that I have to do. But I give myself the best hours of my day for my writing. So that's important to me. So I prioritize that. I write at the same time every day, and I make sure that my writing gets the best of my brain, which is the first thing in the morning.
It's funny. We are very similar in a lot of different ways. I mean, I don't write at 4 a.m. like you do, but yeah. Same thing, same time every day. And for me, it's usually just about an hour, unless I'm doing something, that needs to get done faster. But that's the thing. But it's all about consistency. It's like working out. You've got to do it, regularly, and it's got to become a routine. And that routine will eventually become a lifestyle if you do it every single day. And if you do it every single day, you don't have to do a lot of it. You'll be productive. But the hardest part for aspiring writers I see is just getting it done, because they wait for the muse. The muse doesn't come that day. So, okay, I'll write tomorrow. No, because there's some days that it feels like data entry. You still have to do it. That's the 100% most important thing, is just doing it daily.
Yeah. And you also have to know when to stop. Some days I have more than 2 hours to write, and I find that I don't utilize that time any better than if I just stuck with my 2 hours. So what I end up doing is I've got 4 hours. So I'm going to write for 4 hours. And usually about hour 3, I realize everything I'm putting into this my brain is no, we're done. Right.
Right. You're producing garbage at that point that you're going to have. And there's nothing more exciting than finishing your writing time with something of like, I can't wait to pick this up tomorrow. And you leave it at that place of like, sometimes I'll leave literally mid-sentence. I'll be like, I know exactly where this is going and that's going to be fun. So
I always make a note to myself. This is what I'm working on tomorrow, you know, just so that I know, because it's early in the morning and I'm not always like I'm not always aware. And so it helps me to look and be like, oh yeah, I needed to do this and I needed to do that. And then you're like, okay, here we go. Yeah.
Excellent. I have a final question. It's a two-parter. What book or books have you read recently that you would like to recommend to everyone watching? And what's at the top of your TBR pile?
All right. I just finished an event for Janelle Brown today. I'll Be You by Janelle Brown releases today, and it is fantastic. It hits all the check marks for me. It has twins. It has the entertainment industry. It has cults. It has, you know, the wellness, female empowerment industry. It is phenomenally good. I cannot recommend it enough. I'll Be You by Janelle Brown. Buy it today. It's out.
That's awesome. You know, even though I read a lot of fiction, I can't highly recommend enough Stephen King's Billy Summers.
That was good.
It just is, there's no fantasy in it. It's just a straight up kind of crime story that again has a lot of emotion in it and just is pretty breathtaking. And it's probably, in my opinion, his best work since 11/22/63. And then TBR pile, I just got mailed this. David Ellis's book that's coming out. Look Closer, I think July, maybe something like that. So I am excited to dig into this because I will be talking to him for my podcast.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I am afraid that is all the time we have tonight. Thank you, everyone who joined us for this wonderful event. We hope you found this informative and entertaining. If so, join us next month when we are featuring 3 Southern fiction authors, Ashley Blooms with Where I Can't Follow, Kim Michelle Richardson with The Bookwoman's Daughter, and Lo Patrick with The Floating Girls. And a reminder to please purchase either or both of these authors' books, and I'm telling you, you will love them both, from any of the participating stores listed on Eventbrite, and you will receive signed book plates and swag. So please support our independent bookstores. Thank you all for joining. This has been a wonderful evening. Carter and Julie, I just loved hearing everything you had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great talking to you both.
Bye, Mary. Bye, Carter.